All right, Gaza War Day 395, Lebanon War Day 49. No end in sight. Hamas spokesman Osama Hamdan made a report, I think, today on the Egypt facilitated Hamas Fatah meetings on post-war governance, etc. He said they're successful meetings with Fatah about national unity and governance in Gaza as a Palestinian matter after the war, which is great. But of course, for the war to be over requires Israel to stop the war, and Israel gets to decide when that happens while there's an Israel that functions. So it may be a little premature. And of course, Osama Hamdan recognized that and spoke about it in those terms as well in his own speech. He also said something that I thought was relevant tonight. He said that the US election holds no relevance for the Palestinian people or the movement. They don't care who wins. They're not endorsing a candidate. Why would they? The candidates are both genocidal candidates, and one of them is going to win the election. Israel's also officially canceled the United Nations Refugee Works Agency, which is great. So another United Nations agency canceled. I believe the Secretary General is not allowed there. I believe that they've killed many more United Nations personnel than anybody ever, and they're currently attacking the United Nations mission in Lebanon. And their Western allies are meanwhile continuing to attack the UN Special Rapporteur, who's trying to argue that maybe the country that doesn't follow international law, kills UN personnel, starves people, and commits genocide maybe shouldn't be in the United Nations. But that's well, that's a bridge too far for the West, I suppose. There's something that does, while we're on this subject, there's a couple of points I wanted to make. I've been hearing a couple of phrases that I wanted to address. One is whenever Israel does something like ceasefire, it's particularly to the ceasefire talks, they say Israel's just buying time. And I think this is a misused phrase in this context because Israel doesn't have a time constraint. Israel has attritional constraints. No one knows what they are, but at some point they will reach some attrition threshold in terms of their economy and their military. But we don't know when that will happen, and we don't know how far or how close they are from that. Buying time is like 1967 war, where they knew they were going to have to accept a ceasefire sometime, and then they had to buy time to try to get more days to commit more war and grab more territory. But this is not that. So they have support unto extermination, right? They have support unto total genocide. The West will support them. I think Morandi said this on a podcast I think I watched. He said he has no doubt that the West will support the Israelis all the way. I think he's correct. Do not be looking for Western governments, elites, institutions to stop the Israelis short of anything. They won't. They have no red lines. They have no morals. They have no values. They have no conscience. They have no outrage. And that leads me to my second point. So the first point, just to reiterate, Israel is not running out of time where they have to buy time. I believe whatever Israel needs is, for example, a constant flow of munitions from America, a constant flow of oil from Turkey, a constant flow of food from its neighbors. That's what Israel needs. They don't need time. Time is not limited for them. They can keep this up. As long as those other things keep flowing, time is not a limiting factor for them. Okay. Now, the other thing is the other phrase that I've been seeing, and I just want people to sharpen how they think about these things a little bit. So they're saying things like the world is watching, or this is happening in the full view of the world. This is happening while the world watches. Okay. I thought there was a world. I really did. I was very naive, I think. But like when I was growing up in the 80s, 90s, I thought there was a world. I thought colonialism was over. I thought what we had as the main problem of humanity was development, like how the poor countries could catch up and everybody in the world could have a good life and how to do that. So I was interested in economics. This was how I got interested in all these things, economics and diplomacy, and I got interested in all these things as a young person because I thought, okay, we have this situation as a teenager, as an older child. I saw this. This was kind of what I was obsessed with. I was obsessed with the idea that there were these rich countries like the one I lived in, and they were different from the poor countries like the one I came from. And we would go back to India every once in a while. So I saw, a poor country, and then I would come home. I would come to Canada to a rich country, and then I would see this contrast. So I would always think, so the biggest problem I thought was how all these poor people in these poor countries could achieve a good life. And, reading Nehru and Gandhi and people like this, addressing hunger, world hunger. So that was what I thought. I thought like because colonialism was over and India was free and the African countries were free, they were just poor because they were behind for whatever reason. I learned a lot more about why they're behind as an adult. Behind. Um, and catching up and developmental issues, and then doing so without, for example, overextending the earth and destroying the environment. So that was always what I thought. And that's kind of the career that I wanted, that I got into and everything. I thought development and environment, and these are the issues. And then I became an activist and I realized that war was a big issue and I was an anti-war activist. But the whole time of my youth, I thought there was a world. I thought we were all kind of humanity was all on the same page. And I know, stop laughing at me, okay? Listen, I really believe this stuff. And I thought that there was this humanity. And it's like only, only relatively recently, as I've gone back over history and my historical education with my old history teacher and my historical podcast, and kind of read about colonialism in a different way, in a different depth. Only now am I kind of realizing how profoundly the people who ran the empire, the British Empire, the Anglo-American Empire of the 19th century and early 20th century, how they saw the world. And they didn't see the world in terms of common humanity. And I think I probably knew on some level that racism means people don't see the world in terms of common humanity. But I got to this point where I thought post decolonization in the 40s, 50s, 60s, that okay, after that, we're common humanity. The racial problem is basically solved. Martin Luther King, and in America, the race problem solved. Across the world, the race problem is solved because we have this sovereign countries, the United Nations, sovereign countries that have this world forum. And when there's a problem to be solved, like climate change, we solve it by going to this world forum. If there's a war going on, we use this world forum, international law. common humanity, right? These principles, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And then it's like the quest is to go to these world forums, the World Social Forum, and and argue that we need economic rights and social rights. And that was part of the original conception of the debate was these things. And communism, the idea of communism and socialism, this universal program for lifting up all of humanity. So colonizers' worldview was not that. The colonizers' worldview was there's a species of human being that Cecil Rhodes and Alfred Milner and who else? Those other guys, Jan Smuts and those people from 100 years ago. I read these books, by the way, Jerry Doherty and something McGregor, Hidden History, and then Prolonging the Agony. They argue that this conspiracy of the British elite they brought about World War II as in a kind of a conspiratorial fashion to prevent the rise of Germany's industrial power from rivaling Britain and their imperial world domination. It's like they make it sound like a conspiracy, but everything I've read about it and them is bang on. So this book doesn't come as such a big surprise. My point, though, is that they did not see the world in terms of common humanity whatsoever. They saw themselves and their racial, they called it a racial aristocracy. And decolonization was this process of trying to impose the universal going, you could go back pre-decolonization. Like if you don't want to talk about the 60s, you could talk about the Haitian Revolution as the cycle. Domenico Lacerdo talks about that. There's like a cycle of history that opens with the French Revolution and closes with the end of the Cold War and the fall of the Soviet Union. And in between that 2 centuries is the cycle of trying to create a universal world, right? A world that can watch and to do maybe even stop a genocide. But there is no world. So this is what I realized this year and what I'm seeing this year that fits with everything that I know about history from this study that I've been doing over the past 4 or 5 years of history on for the historical podcast I've been doing is that the people that run the world, the West, that even the people that set up these institutions that make it look like there is a common humanity, they don't believe in it. They don't believe in a common humanity at all. They believe in their racial supremacy. We still live in a world of racial supremacy. We still live in the British, Anglo-American, Zionist empire where they believe that they are our betters racially. And their racial superiority is a bridge. Their belief in that superiority is a bridge that cannot be crossed. It divides the world into people who believe in their superiority and people who don't. And when I say this, I'm expressly arguing against the idea, by the way, that the world consists of rival national states or rival imperial powers. The British imperialists of a century ago and their successors today did not see the world that way. They saw the world as their world to dominate, and everyone else was their tools and obstacles in their way. The Russians were obstacles in their way. The Chinese were to be carved up. China was going to be carved up just like India and Africa. That was the only plan for China. And so today, you have countries that were supposed to be destroyed that are still standing, Russia, China, Iran, and peoples that were supposed to be erased that are still existing, like the Palestinians and the Lebanese and the Syrians. the people of that region, the Syria, Lebanon, Palestine region, Iraq, Yemen, and you have racial supremacists who are in charge of all of the Western countries who are facilitating this genocide and who are doing whatever they need to do, whatever they need to do, whatever they need to pretend not to see, they don't see, whatever they need to defend, they defend, whatever they need to lie about directly straight to your face, they lie about directly straight to your face. Whoever they need to shut up to prevent them from talking, they shut up through technological means, legal means. And so this divide is deep. It's not bridgeable. You will not bridge it. You will not appeal to them. Macklemore's song, where he says, "We bleed the same blood, feel the same hurt. Palestinian life, does it have the same worth?" He's appealing to people who don't feel that. They will never feel that. They do not feel like we bleed the same blood. They do not feel like we feel the same hurt. And it's not lines in the dirt to them either, to keep on Macklemore's song. It's their supremacy over the rest of us. That's what's at stake for them. So I think of Joe Emmersberger. He wrote a review of Yahya Sinwar's book, published it yesterday night, I think. His Substack is called Unedited Anti-Imperialism, and he said something at the end that really struck me because he said in his dark moments he hasn't he doesn't know whether he felt like humanity deserved to survive the climate crisis or, deserved after watching this unfold. It's like humanity has failed. And he said, that's how I felt in the darkest moments. And I know because I mean, I'm sure I talked to him about it, we're friends. But like I knew exactly what he was talking about when he wrote that. And but um, he said, but I know most of us would stop it if we could. And so I think that's true. And so we don't deserve, to be annihilated or whatever it was. Um, let me see. Let me see if I can pull it up because it's really well done. Uh, he said, he finally said, like, our failure is to stop our elites, right? So yeah, being ruled by maniacs means we're faced with extinction. Do we deserve to survive? Watching the images from Gaza has made me say no during my worst moments, but most of us would end the Holocaust if we could. So no, most of us do not deserve to be annihilated because of our depraved leaders any more than Palestinians deserve to be annihilated by Israelis. But then he finishes by saying a separate question is, do we as a species have what it takes to rid ourselves of the maniacs who rule us, who have caused hundreds of millions of needless deaths? Can we muster the wisdom and the courage to rid ourselves of them for good? I hope so. But now I see that it will take much more sacrifice than I previously assumed. So that's Joe's point, and I think I completely agree with everything that he said there. This is what it looks like, unedited anti-imperialism, if you want to read it. So let's go to the fronts. So my last point about this is those of us who would stop it if we could, right? We believe we believe that everybody is equal. We believe that we don't believe in chosen peoples or superior races. But the other side disagrees. And so they have to be defeated for there to be a world. in the sense of a world that can do things. So all of these institutions that have failed, the United Nations Security Council, the ICJ, the ICC, everything is going to have to be rebuilt from complete ground zero. These institutions are useless. They don't do what they say they can do. And it's false advertising. And so re re it's a matter of starting over, as Yahya Sinwar's character said in his in at the end of the book. Ibrahim said this, not about the world, but about the resistance after Oslo. Anyway, let's go to the fronts. Gaza. So the North Gaza starvation plan is advancing. The Israelis are destroying the hospitals, the schools, targeting the hospitals, schools, the people. They're marching them, death marches. They're marching them from one place to another and attacking them. So the idea is, I mean, every genocide has followed this pattern from the North American ones to the Nazis in Eastern Europe. They kill them, starve them, and death march them. And that's what they're doing in North Gaza now. And North Gaza resistance, the Qassam fighters are hitting them very hard. There's videos coming out all the time of ambushes and extensive ambushes, and they're getting them more intensely because the Israelis have to stay there and be there in a big way to do this genocide. It gives the resistance opportunities to hit them and destroy their tanks and ambush their fighters, ambush the Israeli soldiers. So I imagine that the resistance will drive the Israelis out of North Gaza too. They've driven them out of them there before, and they've driven them out of every part of Gaza at some point. At some point, the Israelis withdraw. But the bigger problem is the aid issue. Nothing can make the Israelis open areas, right? The north crossing, and it seems nothing can make the Egyptians. Well, the Egyptians aren't going to risk anything to stop genocide. They're not the Yemenis. They're not um, Lebanon, Hezbollah. They're not Iran. They're not the Iraqi resistance. They're just gonna look after their own interests and Israel's and America's interests to the very end. Again, there's nothing so bad that it'll make Egypt change its mind. There's nothing that's bad enough that'll happen that Egypt will stop being um, whatever it is you want to call it. So Egyptians are actually escorting Israeli warships through the Suez Canal, helping them circumvent the Yemen naval blockade on them. That's what Egypt is doing during the genocide. So that's the bigger problem. The bigger problem is that while the resistance can defeat the Israelis every time they come in, the siege against the civilian population is much harder to crack because it depends on cracking Israel's entire state is devoted to this, including its alliance with Egypt, and its navy is dedicated to Gaza. The starvation of Gaza is the main Israeli project right now. It will not be diverted from this project while Israel exists. So it's that's the hardest nut to crack here. It's not defeating the Israeli army because Hamas can do that. It takes weeks, within days to weeks. Historically speaking, over the course of this year, Hamas fighters defeat the Israelis over the course of some weeks to months in every part of Gaza. The Israelis come, they take hits and they withdraw. And that pattern is even more compressed in the West Bank. There's fighting all over the north, continues. The Israelis go in, they raid, they abduct people, and then there's fighting. Apparently in Ramallah or somewhere around there, some Israeli settlers were trying to rampage and some of them got even wounded. So these settlers can't even rampage anymore without getting attacked, apparently. In Tubas and Jenin, the big fighting continuously. As I'm recording this, there's fighting in Tubas and Jenin, specifically Tamun and Qabatiya, which are near. Tamun is adjacent to Tubas. Qabatiya is adjacent to Jenin. So, okay, so that's Gaza and the West Bank. Iraq. Iraq has been launching a lot of drones, and one of the resistance accounts that I follow, Eyes on South One, has been, he's the only one that I've seen, but um, very reliable in terms of like what he says often does happen. Eyes on South is seeing a lot of signs that Israel's getting ready to bomb Iraq. If Israel bombs Iraq, it would be a joint US operation, of course. And over the course of this war, Israel has attacked Yemen, and that's been a US facilitated and refueled operation. Israel attacked Iran. That was a US refueled and operated up set up. And now, if they attack Iraq, it can only be the same thing. It would be a U.S. operation where there are some Israeli flags flying and some Israeli pilots allowed to participate. I don't really know. The U.S. bombs Iraq all the time. They've been bombing Iraq for 35 years now. So it's not something that they need Israel to do, that Israel brings any new expertise to. It's something that the Americans will do, and they'll say the Israelis did it. Why they would do that politically, just to satisfy the Israeli bloodlust, I guess. It doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of when they did it to Yemen, it kind of made it harder for Yemen's for Ansar Allah's domestic enemies to say anything against Ansar Allah because the Israelis are attacking them. Likewise, Iraq, a lot of the US strategy has been ISIS and Al Qaeda and trying to create civil war conditions in Iraq. And this will make life harder. If they let Israel bomb Iraq, it'll make life a little bit harder politically for ISIS and Al Qaeda and the kinds of groups that they support to try to foment civil war. Same with Lebanon. They simultaneously with bombing Lebanon, they've asked Lebanon people to have a civil war among themselves. The Lebanese people have not shown great interest in this project. Generally speaking, you want to try to foment a civil war when the country isn't being invaded by you. Generally speaking, that's the right chronology historically. But the US and Israel don't seem to feel like they have to adhere to any laws, let alone laws of fomenting civil war in other countries. Iran, speaking of Iran, Iran has promised that they're going to attack Israel with another round of missiles. Said that it was going to be bigger than previous attacks, and I see I see no reason not to believe them. I imagine it'll come in the coming days. It's probably a matter of days, not weeks. They specifically said they don't care about the US election as well. So, uh, yeah, there was a time, I'm sure, when everyone would watch with bated breath what's going to happen in the US election. But like a lot of international institutions that the US is running, no one really cares anymore because the charade that these are different is something only people really deep into US politics could possibly think. Anyone outside of that media sphere circus does not really see any difference between these parties. But Americans, do you, as people say. Please don't get mad at me for saying that. I'm sure most of you aren't mad at me for saying that. But you know, I do believe in being consistent on this. I'm not going to now launch into a detailed thing about America's election. I really don't think it's not my it's not my lane. I'll leave it at that. Um, Yemen. Okay. Yemen, the phenomenal Yahya Sari gave a press conference where he said um, their intelligence, Ansar Allah's intelligence shows that the Israelis are trying to sneak around by saying that they're by changing their ownership, by making more complicated arrangements where their agents are doing it. So they're trying to make it look like it's not Israeli ships or it's not going to Israel, different flags and places like Egypt, right? Escorting them through the Suez Canal. And Yahya Sari said, "We're on to you. We're not gonna fall for it. We're still gonna maintain our blockade." And Yahya Sari said this. He said, "This blockade will remain in place until the aggression stops, until the blockade in Gaza is lifted, and the aggression on Lebanon ceases." So again, very consistent message from Ansar Allah specifically. They blockade Israel until the blockade on Gaza is lifted. So everybody else, Hamas has said we will negotiate, etc. But the aggression on Gaza Strip has to completely stop. But Ansar Allah says the blockade continues until the blockade on Gaza stops. So they have built into their demands the blockade on Gaza. Okay. Would you believe that I mainly fired up this recorder tonight to talk to you about Lebanon, and I'm only getting to Lebanon now. Okay. I want to talk to you about Lebanon. Two things. I want to bring you up to date on what's going on, and I want to give you my impressions on a video that I watched about Lebanon. Okay. November 3rd operations summary from from Hezbollah. Attack drones on gatherings of forces in Al Manara, Natua. Let's bring up the map that I got from Resistance News. Hold on, hold on. Let's pull it up. There you go. Here I am. Okay. So let me read you the names. You can look for the spots, but basically, okay. So attack drones on gatherings of forces at Al Manara, Netua, Zarit, Even Menachem, Yifta, Marun al Ras. Marun al-Ras, I guess, is under Israeli occupation. So this is one of these border towns that the Israelis actually do control. Where is Marun al-Ras? I think it's somewhere around here. I think it's near Yarun. But you can see all of these areas were under drone attack, right? Zarit, Even Menachem. These are the areas they mentioned. Okay. Also, rocket barrages on Meron Base, Sha'al, Hatzor, Dalton, Ayelet, Hashahar, and Krayot in Haifa, Nahariya, and Kiryat Zvi. So a bunch of rockets a little bit deeper into the Israeli depth, occupied Palestine, and along and drone attacks on gatherings of forces in these places at or near the border. Okay. You guys also probably know the news that the Israelis kidnapped a sailor somewhere way up the coast, up the Lebanon coast. This is their perfect, and they kidnapped somebody else in Syria. This is their favorite kind of spy game, right? Keeps you guessing why would they kidnap this guy? Kidnapping operations, but they did it with almost certainly had German collusion. Big surprise there. And German UNIFIL though, like why is Germany shouldn't be in UNIFIL, but of course UNIFIL is a United Nations thing and they exist to facilitate genocide at this point, not to stop it. So the Germans are in UNIFIL and the Germans are helping the Israelis commit kidnappings now, which is great. So the US is also deciding, according to a report I read in the Cradle, that who can use the airport and who can't. So the Iraqis wanted to establish an air bridge, and the Americans said, no, you can't. Why is the US embassy able to decide what happens in Lebanon? Because Lebanon is not sovereign, because Lebanon is controlled by the US. So it's a US controlled colony that's now official officially helping Israel invade it and destroy it, which is also great. And the Israelis are being they don't have to face the Lebanese army, which is basically withdrawn from the battlefield. And they're saying, we're doing this as a favor to you. We're destroying Hezbollah on your behalf, destroying, meanwhile, these communities and displacing 1 million people and murdering people in hospitals and doing all the things that they do. So what I wanted to say about this is just one simple thing. There are lots of takes on this and speculations on what the Israelis were doing with this, and I don't really know. But the thing I wanted to say about it was that this shows that Hezbollah is a guerrilla force, even after all these years, even with all their remarkable abilities, all their training, their really good equipment, their adaptation to the enemy and the battle they're fighting. They are a guerrilla force because the state that they operate in is occupied. It's basically US it's under US control. It's some kind of US protectorate. And so they will always be under this kind of dispensation. They will always be a guerrilla force of necessity. There's always going to be a certain clandestine nature to their um, activities and their operations. Um, okay, now let me. I might come back to that point. I think I might come back to that point towards the end. But let me continue here. There was an article by Ali Shoaib, who I think I've mentioned before on this. He does really good summaries of what's going on. And he talked about where the Israelis are at in each of along this whole front. So basically, the situation is that in summary, the Israelis have advanced to many of these communities a little bit and they've established what's called fire control. So, in military terms, armies can establish fire control over a road or over a village before they establish physical control. So, it's not necessarily that you have men there or vehicles there, but you have fire control, meaning you can reach out and hit that road or anything on that road whenever you want, which establishes a type of control over that, right? So it's because if the enemy has fire control, you can't get your over the road leading to that village, then you can't get your troops to that village to reinforce or supply. So that's what fire control means. Fire control is bad news. If the enemy has fire control, that's bad news for you. And there are some areas because like just look at the geography, the Israelis with their firepower and their air superiority have been able to establish fire control over some of these bordering uh, villages. That's the summary. But But having said that, there are Ali Shoaib reports a lot of resistance that they've run into, and they've settled for fire control because they've gone in, they've taken a lot of hits, and then they've withdrawn. So this is what happened in Nakura. Nakura's over here. They entered, they had four tanks destroyed, and so what they do is they have been shelling and airstriking continuously Nakura, and but they've retreated and they are trying to maintain they're trying to infiltrate again. So they've been making their way and fighting in Nakura. Aita Shab, where's that? That's over here. In the middle, more in the middle. Aita Shab, they've destroyed the western and southern neighborhoods, and they're doing artillery shelling. Yarun, they're trying to achieve fire control and they haven't. Marun al Ras is also around here. There, Israel is in Marun al Ras and taking rocket fire. They're shelling Bint Jubail and airstriking. They'll be trying to take Bint Jubail. Bint Jubail is where they were stopped in the 2006 war. So it'll be a big celebration that you'll hear all about if they take Bint Jubail. Again, I've been saying, assume they are going to take Bint Jubail, assume they're going to take a lot of the south and occupy it, and then the next phase of the guerrilla war will begin. But it's 35 days in, and they haven't. So Aitarun, they are inside the town. The resistance inside Aitarun is fighting with them. They have fire control over Belida. They've been airstriking and doing artillery attacks on Mace al-Jabal, on Hula. They've sent five bulldozers to Hula. Two of them have been destroyed, and so they're here at the outskirts of Hula. Markaba and Rab Thalathin, they have established fire control over Markaba. Edessa, they are in Edessa and they're trying to go to Taiba. So they're fighting, they're between this axis. This is where they're fighting. And Kfar Shuba Hills. They're trying to advance from Kfar Shuba Hills. They're trying to advance to Khiam. Khiam, they've been fighting for 4 days. And this is where major fighting is happening in Khiam. Did I miss anywhere? Yeah, they've entered Yarin. That's more back to the western part. Bustan and Mawahin. And then they maintain fire control over here. They are in on their side of the border at Ramia and they're shelling. So basically, this is the zone where the Israelis are in and fighting. Just a few kilometers from the border. Okay. Now, I wanted to talk to you. I'm not going to talk as usual. I'm not going to name any names, but I watched a video of military analyst. It's a young guy from Quebec. I had been watching his stuff on Russia, Ukraine for years, kind of a pro-Ukraine approach that he takes. And suddenly he took an interest in Israel and Palestine and the Lebanon War. Um, and I don't know if that interest was pecuniary. I suspect possibly it was, but of course, you never know with these things. It stands to reason that Israeli, what do they call that? That media operations room might have been interested in sponsoring military analysts with big channels to do pro-Israel military analysis, which this was. So basically, the video that I watched was arguing that Israel had finally broken through. That was the word that they used, a breakthrough, finally a breakthrough. And they had broken through after a long time of fighting. And there were a couple of things that were interesting about it. And the one was the way that the Israeli army was treated like a real normal army. So the pager attack was treated as like a cool thing. The assassination of Nasrallah was treated as a cool cool thing, killing all the commanders and the assassinations. Um, the bombing of these towns, there's the military analyst pretends that they're not bombing hospitals and they're not bombing civilian targets. And he actually went out of his way to say that it was fake news that they destroyed the villages completely, even though you could see video that they took of them proudly destroying villages. And so there's a lot of pretending that it's a normal military that isn't doing these atrocities on the regular and broadcasting the atrocities specifically to try to terrorize civilians and show their impunity. That was one point that struck me. Another point that struck me was the it's related, but the idea that there was some kind of coherent operational art. So he basically was talking about Israel as if it was Russia. So he said, they're going to go from here, they're going to go from here, they're going to create a pocket, right? They're going to create a cauldron, and they're going to encircle Hezbollah inside of, between the Litani and the Israeli border, and then they're going to squeeze in and demilitarize and destroy Hezbollah. And that is not what Israel is going to do, you guys. That's not what Israel does. Israel will depopulate the south, create a massive refugee situation, use massive bombings against civilian infrastructure, and occupy to the extent that they can with the troops that they have. And that's a big area for even for the five divisions that they have. And they will be under constant guerrilla attack. That's what they're gonna do. And this military analyst was talking about Lebanon as if Gaza wasn't even happening, or as if it was just like another hunt for terrorists. And so the assumption of normalcy, the assumption of strategy, and then there was a lot of hardy har making fun of the United Nations for being supposedly biased against Israel. So that these are some of the narratives that the Israeli or the pro-Israeli our side are working on and with. And it was kind of striking to me how that story is spun out. And it was well sourced. It was constantly going back to mainstream sources, Western sources on how the war was going and where the war was at and the different the casualties, the Israeli casualties reports that the what the Israelis took in the way of casualties and and kind of concluded that now that Israel has broken through that they're going to drive to the Litani and encircle Hezbollah, encircle them in these mountains. So I wanted to just kind of address that as the story you're likely to see. And we can link that back to Basel Araj and the arrows on a map and how the arrows on a map don't necessarily tell you the story. Now, I don't think, I think it's a bit of an exaggeration to say that they've had a breakthrough. I said all along that they were likely to go fairly deep into Lebanon and begin an occupation and come under ambush and attack from Hezbollah while occupying Lebanon. Because the other thing they keep talking about wanting to do is create a buffer zone. So they're just going to continuously bomb and artillery shell until there's a buffer zone. You, you know, that's not really going to work. They can bomb and shell and they'll be taking rocket fire from the other side. And if they want to go and occupy it, they're going to have to go and occupy it, and then they're going to have to fight a long guerrilla war with Hezbollah and all of Hezbollah's allies that will be increasingly mobilized over this. So the story of a breakthrough and the upcoming encirclement of Hezbollah, at which point what Hezbollah maybe is going to surrender because of this breakthrough. Maybe that's the notion. I guess that is the story that is being prepared on the Israeli side. Um, and similarly, you know, in Gaza, I don't even know what they're doing anymore. Narratively, they're saying they're just getting Hamas. I mean, if you look at like Twitter, I was saying today, I almost dread when a tweet does well because then the botnet, the pro-Israel botnet comes and they just say just revolting things. Like it's like the state of their narrative operation is in such bad shape because you talk about like war crimes, mass murder of children and starvation, and they go, "Ha, I shouldn't have messed with Israel." And it's like that's your that's your story, that's your defense now. Um, so with Gaza, it shouldn't have messed with Israel, and with Lebanon, it's we've broken through and we're going to drive them back. The other thing that isn't shown in this pro-Israel military analysis is all the stupid stuff, right? The going into houses and playing the piano in a house you bombed and putting children's toys on the back of a bulldozer and putting dead women's clothing on and putting that on your dating profile or the thing that came out today of them trying to get a flag. So they raised some Israeli flag over some building and then they promptly got hit with a big guided missile from Hezbollah, who was watching them do the whole flag operation in the first place. So none of that kind of thing. Instead, what you see is like long columns of Israeli soldiers marching and looking tough and lining up in their armored vehicles and stuff like that. Just really scary, imposing videos that are carefully chosen. So, um, that's these are the stories that are out there right now. I wanted to share with you. Hopefully now you don't have to, but it was interesting to see the kind of construction of a parallel universe and how they select the relevant details and omit the relevant details to create that story. All right. So some of you guys have an election tomorrow. Good luck with that. Um, who knows when the Iran response will happen? Maybe you'll see me before that. Probably you will, because events are dramatic and happening fast. And maybe you'll see me after that. Um, in the meanwhile, hang in there, like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.